their early 20s.
We're seeing a level of disease incidence in people in their 20s, which is about double the incidence in the rest of the population as a whole. So incidence levels are really high and rising. You must assume at this point that you're infectious and that the other people you come into contact with are potentially infectious.
Education stakeholders will meet over the Christmas holidays as planning continues for the safe reopening of schools in January. General Secretary of the INTO, John Boyle, says they'll follow public health advice when it comes to reopening next month.
If public health make a decision that schools have to close, well, nobody really wants to go back to remote learning. Neither the children, the teachers, nor the families, I would reckon, would want to be going back to that space. But if it has to happen, teachers stepped up to the plate last year with very creative lessons online. If it has to happen, it'll be done. But the indications today were that we're planning for a safe reopening on the 6th of January.
From St Stephen's Day, nightclubs in the north will be ordered to shut and a maximum of 6 people will be allowed to dine or drink together. Health Minister Robin Swan says the Stormont executive doesn't have the cash for the public health controls he would have liked to bring in.
All other things being equal, the executive would have gone further today. However, all things are not equal. Our options are extremely limited, especially given the absence of furlough and those additional supports.
And railway workers are in fear of their lives from the thuggery they're exposed to. Their union says that's why 77% have voted for industrial action, with the strike not yet being ruled out. NBRU General Secretary Dermot O'Leary says staff don't believe their bosses are taking the problem seriously.
The concerns they have are not being addressed sufficiently in the first instance by the company, but beyond that, of course, there are other stakeholders involved here. And again, our members have today delivered a result of 77% in favour of industrial action. Again, I suppose to explain, it will be the last thing they want to do. As far as they're concerned, something needs to give here. They go to work every day in fear of their lives, and that's not a nice place to be.
It's just gone 2 minutes past 8.
News Talk weather.
Thanks to Ryanair. Last minute shopper? Don't stress. Give them the gift of travel with a Ryanair gift card.
Cloudy and wet tonight with rain in the south and west extending nationwide and turning heavy at times. Lows of 7 to 11 degrees. Now you're up to date on News Talk.
All you need for Christmas.
News Talk's Christmas cash machine.
Oh, get in there! Oh,
Thank you. Oh my God, I can't believe it. Your chance to win big.
Ali in Drogheda, she won over €15,000 in the Christmas cash machine today. The new total is €17,256.81. Text the word play to 57599. Get your entry in by 3 o'clock tomorrow, and Kieran Cuddy could be calling you back. You have to answer your phone within 5 rings and the money is yours. So remember, the amount again, €17,256.81. So text play to 57599. It's over 18s only. Text costs €2.50. Full terms and conditions are over on newstalk.com.
Wednesday night rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us. Everyone in.
Yeah, you're welcome along. So very happy to say that we're joined by Rory O'Connor of the Irish Independent. Rory, great to have you along.
Thanks, Joe. How's it going?
Very well. And Chris Jones is the BBC rugby correspondent, joined us once before already this season. I think, Chris, it's hard to keep track of time, actually. Maybe it was around the lines. I don't know.
It's a bit.
Most welcome back.
I think it was ahead of the Lions team selection. But yeah, great to be back. Season's greetings to you guys.
Yeah.
Hey, Jonesy.
Hey, Rod,
that
right.
was a hell of a Lions tour, wasn't it, Chris? Do you want to talk about that again? It was so enjoyable, wasn't it?
Oh, do you know what? I wrote a review of the year for the BBC Sport website, which is going up in the next few days. And it said a lot for the tour that the most memorable moment happened off the field with the Razzie Erasmus rant and all the fallout from that, which kind of soured the tour. And yeah, it feels like a tour best forgotten in some ways.
Well, I'm going to kick off on a suitably vague point, and I'm hoping, Chris, that you might reassure us that we're not alone here in caring about the Heineken Champions Cup. Rory, numerous games off the weekend. It is very unfortunate for the EPCR that in the 2 years where they have tried to really get this new format, I suppose, into the general consciousness and love of the fans, they've been hit with COVID. That's a really difficult thing for the EPCR, and there's not much they can do about that. And yet, everywhere I look, there's just a sense that it's not quite working. And absolutely, COVID is a big part of that. But equally, I read Donald Lenihan this morning in the Irish Examiner, and he was talking about death by 1,000 cuts. He doesn't like the new format. We're drip-fed these 2 games pre-Christmas. It's just not enough to get into for such a big part of the season pre-Christmas. And he also wonders increasingly, is it just fading away in the consciousness of the non-Irish clubs? Now, he mentions 2 French clubs here, for example. Castres have fielded a diluted side in both games to date against Harlequins and Munster. And then Montpellier, for instance, went to Exeter round 1. Most of their frontline players rested. They were stuffed by 42 points to 6. And a completely anecdotal point, but one to just throw at you anyway. I was with family at the weekend and I was saying, the Munster match is on now. And there was a sense in the room, what's the point of watching Munster beat a French side who don't care about the competition? Which was kind of interesting. So discuss, Rory, where are we with the Heineken Champions Cup right now?
Well, yeah, I think all the points you make and you raise are valid. I don't think there's any hysteria in there. I think there's definitely a concern to be raised. I mean, Chris can obviously give us the perspective from the UK, but certainly the French. There's always been a fear that they one day would just stop caring about it. I think we've relied on 3 or 4 teams from France and probably a few more from England caring a lot about this tournament, but to keep the whole show on the road. It's so important to Irish rugby. For the 4 provinces, it's always been the be all and end all. It's always been far more important than whatever name the competition, the URC, is now known as, has been, although that has increased in importance. But even now, when that is a slightly more important competition, it still fades in comparison to these weeks when we sell, where Irish rugby sells its provincial games. Like that, this is where they sell their season tickets. It's where they sell TV rights over. Well, they don't sell them themselves, but this is where they sell themselves, where they sell their jerseys and stuff. I mean, Cast have never, I don't know about never, but in the last 10, 15 years, they've never really taken away games very seriously. And in this mad world that we live in now, when there's too many games in the first place and the top 14 is increasingly more important and they get really lucrative TV rights and the Premiership is so strong as well, it's just harder and harder to get director of rugby and presidents and club chairmans to care about a tournament that they don't think they can probably win in the end. And even if they do go deep in it, it's going to cost them, maybe not cost them money, but it won't earn them as much money as a good run in the Premiership or, and all of that stuff as well. So it's definitely being ebbed away out every year, I think. And I don't think COVID's done it any favours. When it gets to the knockout and you have 16 or 8 teams who really want to win it, it's a great tournament. We haven't been able to give this format a good look over because it hasn't been able to take place properly. But I think it's a terrible format. It's completely done by necessity because they want 24 teams. They only have a certain amount of weekends, and they've decided that it's better to have more knockouts than pool games. But the 2 pools, teams not playing against each other, just doesn't really work. I'd agree with Donald Lennon there, but the overall concern will be that ultimately will there come a point where English and French teams just go, this doesn't mean enough to us. Why would we do this? And whether they either treat it as a B competition or just don't participate at all. That's the fear that's there. I think we're still way away from that, but something needs to be done to try and save it. Problem is the leagues own the competition effectively, so they decide where it fits in the calendar.
The French appetite for the tournament, I think, is clear cut. We know Racing really want it. We know Toulouse want it. We know Clermont have a tradition. I think La Rochelle, because of O'Gara there, are into this tournament, and after that, less so. The English relationship with it, you might give us your thoughts, Chris. Be really curious because, look, in fairness, an English rugby fan could listen to this conversation and say, sorry, did you miss Saracens and Exeter? What are you talking about?
Yeah, because that's the quick rebuttal would be that 4 of the last 6 winners have been from England. Now, 3 of those occasions was Saracens, and they clearly had a squad that could compete deep into the business end of both competitions. Now, we know that squad was constructed from some foul means as well as fair. So the Saracens have dropped away, and Exeter were left flying the flag and obviously won the tournament season before last. But I think you've almost got to look at it on a club-by-club basis. The Premiership is super competitive at the moment. If you look at the table at the moment, they're 9-10 rounds in, not quite half, but not a million miles off halfway in. And you've got Northampton in 3rd and Bristol in 12th. Now, if those guys played 10 times, I don't think there's much in them as teams, 3rd and 12th. So you have an incredibly competitive Premiership, but probably the Premiership is one or two teams short at the moment of quality sides that can really go and win at Toulouse, or win at or win in the La Défense Arena, or win at Thomond, or win in Dublin against Leinster. Exeter maybe are there. Saracens might be back there. Leicester are rebuilding under Steve Borthwick. They're not ready, I don't think, to go deep on two fronts. You've got a team like Wasps who have a terrible injury run. Bath are a bit all over the place. Bristol are having a bad season. Northampton, I don't think they have the depth of squad. So it's a tricky one. I think it's not dissimilar to France, where you do have a cast who don't really care about the tournament. But then you have a Racing who came to Northampton on the opening Friday of the tournament and were brilliant. You've got a Clermont who've had such a proud record in this competition. So I'm reluctant to sort of see it as a one-size-fits-all. As for the format, I think there's something in the format, because what I think really hurt the old traditional 6 rounds group format was those rounds 5 and 6 when teams just gave up the ghost come January time when they couldn't get anywhere. I would probably try and have, if you can, pools of 3. Do you just get that neater narrative of playing home and away? I completely take Rudd's point that when it's 12 and you're not playing each other, it's so hard to follow as a fan. If they can somehow get groups of 3 or maybe 4 and then have them playing off against each other, and just having teams realise that you could lose your first 2 and still get through to a shootout in the round of 16. And COVID has had a major issue there, because this home and away round of 16 could have revitalised the knockout stages, but we've never been able to give it a go because of COVID. And arguably for the next few years, we won't be able to give it a go because cross-border tournaments are so difficult at a time like this. So I think it's hard to make any sweeping conclusions at this stage. We're so early on in this tournament and COVID's having a play. But I wouldn't be surprised if in a few years' time there are 1 or 2 more English clubs that are ready to be fighting in, the business end of both domestic and European comps.
Yeah, okay. So readiness is a part of the story here as well, and COVID is for sure. So could I ask, for instance, Chris, because you'd have such a better grasp on the best starting 15s of all the Premiership clubs than I would, for instance, this season thus far, what percentage of the Premiership clubs in the Heineken Champions Cup have gone with their absolute best 15, and we're not resting anybody for a big Premiership match in a week or 2?
Yeah, hard to say again, because Bristol haven't played yet, and I know they're having a rotten time of it in the league, but that's still a side that when Semi Radradra and Charles Pietau and all their best players, Chris Fouin, Stephen Latour, when they're all on the pitch, you think they could achieve something. They won the Challenge Cup, didn't they? And had a great win away in France in the final. So it's hard to say where they are because they've yet to play. Sale, I think, are a team who are struggling in the Prem, but might fancy giving Europe a thrash. Certainly the noise is out of Sale. They want to give it a go, but they've only played the once, and that was away at the Ospreys. Leicester rotated and then still won in Bordeaux. So you can't really criticise Steve Borthwick if you go and do the business of the top 14 leaders away from home. And then they beat Connacht, who I thought were great. I was at Welford Road last Sunday, but Leicester are 2 from 2. Harlequins won't win the Champions Cup, I don't think, but they're 2 from 2 as well. So, yeah, I wouldn't be too critical of some of these Prem sides. Wasps will feel gutted that they didn't beat Munster at home, given Munster's problems. But again, it's a Wasps team that were hit badly by COVID and by injury. So I do think there are a fair few. I wouldn't want to make excuses on behalf of these teams, but I think there are extenuating circumstances. And I hope that if they're going to persist with this ring-fence league, it does mean that more teams think, actually, why not give it a go in Europe? And that's where I think the format with only the 4 rounds of pool matches will hopefully encourage more teams to think, yeah, why not give it a thrash? Over the course of 6 rounds, that might be too difficult on the squad, but over the course of 4, maybe we can give it a go.
The other thing, Joe, on Chris's point there is, like, 16 teams out of 24 go through, so they probably made a calculation that they could, even if they want to win the tournament, they could probably take 1 weekend off and win 2 and get enough points to get into the last 16. And for some of the clubs we're talking about, there's a backdoor into the Challenge Cup. There's only 2 teams for whom at the end of this pool stages Europe is over. The Challenge Cup is there. So if you're Northampton, there's you potentially could be better off slipping into the Challenge Cup and having a good run at the knockouts and picking up a bit of silverware at the end of the season. So I think that's where the format again maybe needs a tweak. I think Chris has some good ideas there about how you go about it. But there's not enough jeopardy maybe to try and force teams to, and also, could they potentially put into individual prize money for each game so that there's an actual financial reward to encourage particularly the French presidents to put their best teams in? At the moment, like everyone's a winner in this tournament in some ways by the end of the pool stages. Really, you're playing for time until the knockouts. Sure, you can get a home quarterfinal, semi-final if you finish top of the whole ladder. But at the moment, COVID is deciding those results. So, you're taking chances as well there.
Yeah, no, a huge part of this story is COVID. And to be fair, the sense of indifference amongst French clubs and maybe to a lesser extent English clubs is not a new thing. It maybe just feels a bit exacerbated at the moment. Chris, could I ask you about Premiership generally? Pat Lam had some fairly dire warnings should another lockdown result in games behind closed doors, for instance, and how clubs over in England wouldn't necessarily survive that. And I know that the salary cap is coming down in the short term. What's the general financial health of the Premiership?
Well, I don't think it's great. And I think, as always, the Premiership clubs are super reliant on their owners and their benefactors and their sponsors, etc., to put their hands in their pockets and keep everything going. Look, the salary cap, that's big for the Prem, because if you think back to 2016 kind of time, I think there were 5 English sides in the quarterfinal of the Champions Cup. I think Sarries went on to win it, but teams like Wasps were there. Bath were going well at that point as well. The salary cap was continually, almost exponentially rising. You had the boom of the 2015 World Cup. You had this huge payout from the RFU to Premiership clubs for player release. So there was a real financial boon around English club rugby kind of 4 or 5 years ago. And yes, they've had the CVC injection as well, which has been huge in the last couple of years. But certainly the pandemic's hit them really hard. The BT money's keeping them going. The money from the benefactors is keeping them going. And it just feels if as they start to get back on a level footing with crowds coming back in, regular crowds coming back in, they have this sort of dangled threat of more restrictions coming in. So that's going to be incredibly hard for them. And I think, just go back to the previous conversation about Europe, that 5 million salary cap, yes, they're marquee players, but that's putting them at a level with the Welsh regions. And the Welsh regions have been underfunded for so long. So when you are asking a team like a Northampton to go and try and win at places like Toulouse and Leinster, who are operating in different financial spheres, then I think the Prem clubs would turn around and go, look, we just don't have this option at the moment. So it's going to be a really interesting few years. And I don't think we can underestimate the impact having this salary cap coming down quite markedly will have on English club rugby. And then you chuck in, the threat of further restrictions. And yeah, I can understand why people are sounding quite a pessimistic note.
Yeah. And what's prompted the salary cap coming down?
COVID, yeah. Purely because of the impact of the pandemic. And this happened, say 15 months ago or so. I can't pinpoint exactly when it was, but there were so many contractual issues. The players took a pay cut. A lot of the clubs signed up their whole squad again on 2 or 3 year deals. Some of those deals are now coming up in 6 months' time. So it's why you're seeing quite some big name transfers in between clubs. Ellis Genge going from Leicester to Bristol. You're seeing Johnny Hill go from Exeter to Sale. You're seeing Sam Skinner leave, and by the sound of things, Edinburgh are trying to get something going financially up there as well. So there's lots going on behind the scenes, and I do wonder whether there'll be some sort of creative solution where some clubs will argue that, look, we can't compete on 2 fronts with a £5 million salary cap. What about having an extra marquee player just for Europe, or creative options like that? So I wouldn't be surprised if the whole time some of these owners and chairmen and chief execs are trying to find ways to, yes, keep the club solvent and keep the club sustainable, but also make sure that they're not just accepting going back to a level of mediocrity in Europe.
Actually, one last question, which might be a slightly unfair but neat way of getting to the heart of the interest in European competition over in England as opposed to France. So if you were to ask the Irish provinces, would you rather win the Heineken Champions Cup or your domestic competition, the answer would be a universal Heineken Champions Cup. Of the English teams, give us, the top 5, 6, 7, the routine ones we see in Europe. Would they next year rather win the Premiership or would they rather win the Heineken Champions Cup? Give us who would rather win the Heineken Champions Cup and who would rather win Premiership, based on DNA and just your gut feeling.
Yeah, no, it's a brilliant question. I think if you ask a Northampton fan, for example, they'd rather win the league. They've won Europe once before. They won the league at 2014, but I think them it'd be about the league. I think for Leicester it'd be about the league because they've not been competing for the last few years, having been the best around for so long. Saracens aren't a factor in the Champions Cup at the moment, but we know how much it did mean to them. Exeter, that's a tricky one. They have cracked Europe, so maybe they think, we want to go back to being the best in England again. Harlequins, I think, would love to win Europe, but they won the Premiership kind of out of nowhere. So I think they are keen to really give it a go. Look, I don't think it's too dissimilar to France, where the league has such a strong identity. And you're dealing in France with these great rugby towns. And similarly, in England, you're dealing with classic rivalries. And there is this level of sort of intensity about the games week in, week out. And I think sometimes the Premiership's, it's a blessing and a curse, because it means that people can get sort of overly obsessed with the league. And even without relegation, they can think, we just want to get into the top 6 or whatever. But look, surely it should be a no-brainer. Finishing 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, or going on a run in Europe. It's got to be about a run in Europe. It's got to be about giving your fans these away trips. And maybe there's that level of sort of, COVID has led to people think, well, actually, even if we do get an away trip at La Rochelle, we can't go anyway. So I don't know, but I'd love to think that teams in a ring-fence league would think, come on, there's no point constantly qualifying for Europe and not then giving it a go. Top 4, different. You get a chance to do a Harlequins and win the title, win the Premiership title at Twickenham, which is just, I think, a dream for so many Premiership clubs. But yeah, I'd like to think that Europe still is up there. And I wouldn't want to sort of say that, to tar all the Premiership clubs with one brush and say they're not interested. I just think there's a few extenuating circumstances perhaps at play at the moment as well.
Yeah, no, that's a perfectly fair, nuanced answer. Again, Rory, I'm just so conscious here. I'm talking as if the Irish Promises have won the last 10 in a row.
Absolutely. I'm jealous. Like, I think we should be jealous of England and France and the strength of their domestic competitions. I mean, what we would do to have a week-on-week competition that we care about that much, unfortunately, the URC, it may well one day get there where we care about Munster versus the Blue Bulls and, Leinster against Zebre in the same way. But, really, we're all here. We're kind of biding our time until the big ones in Europe. And then you get there and you don't feel the love back. But that's not to say, I think what it is that, Munster, Ulster have probably the same chance in Europe as a Leicester or Northampton. They're just less realistic about it. And they live the dream a bit more. They throw everything at it. Maybe not Leicester's, that's unfair on Leicester. Leicester are going well, but they just throw themselves into it. They believe they can do it. They go on a run. Ultimately it ends in heartbreak. And then it almost bandaxes them for the URC then, because Munster have just kind of lost their way in the Magners League, the Celtic League, and the Pro 14 over the years, and really should have picked up at least one of those over the years, but cared almost too much about Europe. So it's not a criticism, I don't think. I think
it's not a criticism. It's a reality.
It's up to the EPCR and it's up to the Irish provinces to come up with a way of getting these teams' attention, but also of the URC building itself into a competition that's worthy of talking about in the same way. And ultimately, I think this COVID on one side is also the ridiculous rugby schedule, the global calendar, all these big issues that we always keep coming back to that squeeze everything until it's gone. And I think the Champions Cup is a great competition. It's just being squeezed from every direction by a couple of different external factors that cause big problems. And these people are professional and hard-nosed and realistic, and they make business decisions, and that's why sometimes they shy away from fielding their strongest teams. But I think by the time we get to the last 8, the last 4, the best couple of teams in Europe will still get there, and we'll have a couple of really, really good games at the end of it. It's just this kind of winter period where we do get the odd mismatch. And if you have 24 teams in the tournament, you're going to get that as well.
Sure. No, absolutely.
Yeah, and just quickly, if I can.
Sorry,
Joe,
shoot. You can, of course, yeah.
Yeah, on Rod's point about Europe being squeezed. I mean, I think you got, whether it's giving the EPCR credit, given it's kind of run by the leagues anyway, we've seen the Premiership is expanding. The URC is expanding. I know that the URC are trying to have fewer overlaps with the club game, and I think we would all agree that overlaps with the club and international game is one of the biggest things that sort of cannibalize rugby. But I quite admire and respect the way that EPCR have gone, okay, we're going to go from 6 to 4 at the pool stage, and we will chop off a week or 2 from our season. It's just, you hope that everyone can have that attitude of, let's try, and if we each take a piece out, we can make the whole thing that little bit stronger, because no one keeps wanting more matches. Everyone just wants more meaningful matches. And, the Premiership is expanding up to 14, and it's also losing promotion relegation, which was one of its great USPs above what traditionally the Pro 14 URC has had. So, you just almost think that it's not fair for Europe to be compromising on the length of its competition and other competitions not to be.
Yeah. Tris on YouTube says, great to see Chris on the pod. So there you are, Chris. There's one fan anyway. We are talking here with Chris Jones and Rory O'Connor. Rugby on Off the Ball is with thanks to Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us, everyone in. Chris, I have 2 quick questions for you, and then I'll let you go before we discuss more boring domestic matters here. Bath and Johan van Graan. Bath and Johan van Graan. This kind of surprised Munster fans. What have Bath seen in van Graan?
Well, they tried to get him a few years ago, if I remember rightly. I think they got really close to getting him a cup. I can't exactly remember the time. I'm not sure it was when they were also going after Todd Blackadder, and Van Graan turned them down. They ended up with Blackadder. I might have got that wrong, but I know for a fact that Van Graan has been on Bath's radar for a good 2 or 3 years now. But it's a funny old situation, isn't it? And we were chatting about this on our Rugby Union Weekly podcast about how, we've got Ellis Genge, who's the Leicester captain, moving off to Bristol. They're playing each other on Boxing Day. It's a quirk of rugby union. We don't get it in football, where if you go in the January transfer window, you go, don't you? You almost get you sign for a new club and your locker's cleared and you're out the door. In rugby union, we have this weird situation where 6 months out, you're leaving the club. And I'm not questioning anyone's professionalism, of course not. But how easy is it for Van Graan to say to these Munster players, look, come on this journey with us, we're building here at the province, etc., if he's going? And then how difficult it is for Bath. They've got a DOR, they've got a head coach. Are they dead ducks? Are they just sitting there waiting until someone taps them on the shoulder? So, look, Bath have had a millionaire owner in Bruce Craig in for a decade now. Sure. And apart from a couple of finals, one Prem, one Challenge Cup, they've not really made a scratch on the top table of European and domestic rugby. So they're trying another route, and we'll see how it goes. He's certainly done a pretty good job at Munster. Yeah, and sorry, the way I phrased that question might have sounded terribly disrespectful to Johan van Graan. I didn't mean it that way. Just meant that, fairly or otherwise, we would not associate Johan van Graan with an exciting brand of rugby at Munster. It just hasn't happened. And Stephen Larkham came in and they tried, and still hasn't happened. And there was a box kicking bonanza against Castres on Saturday again, which felt like more of the same. And look, to what extent DNA survives, I don't know. But you think of Bath in the heyday, and it was a certain brand of rugby. I don't know to what extent that has survived. But I just wonder how compatible the two are. Well, this is the age-old question. Does a coach set a club's DNA, or does the club set its DNA? We had a classic example with Harlequins where they managed to get a major coup with Paul Gustard leaving Eddie Jones's coaching team to go to Harlequins, seen as a real good bit of business, one of the best coaches in England. He tried to go down a territory squeezing Saracens model, and Harlequins weren't up for it. He left, and they won the league without a coach, flinging the ball around because they said, let's go back to our way. So what is the Bath way? We don't know. Yes, they had periods in the 90s where Leicester played the pragmatism and Bath with Barnes and Guscott played the rugby, but that's a long time ago now. The only time Bath got to a Premiership semi in recent years was playing a forward game based on a massive scrum, and then under Mike Ford back in sort of 2015 kind of time, they played lovely rugby and were playing that way. So I don't know what Bath identity is, and maybe they do need someone to come in and try and set it, but they've tried Stuart Hooper, they've tried Todd Blackadder, they've given it a go. They've got Ed Griffiths, who achieved some major things with the Springboks and with Saracens, coming in to be the new chairman. So we'll see. But yeah, certainly Bath have not got a great track record recently of recruiting a high-profile coach, and that coach coming in and making a difference. For whatever reason, it's just not worked, and we wait to see whether Van Graan can buck the trend. Okay, good stuff. Listen, we might nag you again come Six Nations time and chat to you about Eddie Jones. Anytime. No, look forward to it. I hope you guys are well, and have a great Christmas. No, thanks so much. A lot of big fans of the podcast out there, I'm sure, as well. So Chris Jones, thanks very much. Good stuff, yeah. Cheers, fellas. BBC's rugby correspondent Rory O'Connor of the Irish Independent staying with us. So to segue to domestic matters, well, on the Van Graan point and Larkham, and maybe it was just a consequence of the game being rather dour and the performance not being good, and it's the first game since the announcement that they're leaving, I suppose. But you did kind of think to yourself, oh God, lame duck managers don't tend to do well anywhere.
Yeah, it was a really bad advertisement for what Johan van Graan has to offer. It's probably unfair to say that, but I was in Coventry a week earlier for that. Like, it was a vibrant Munster performance. It wasn't perfect by any means, but they were feeding off each other. There was these young guys, there was the old guys who were bouncing off the young guys. It worked so well. They were attacking from inside their own half. It was amazing. And then you get this, a big crowd at Thomond Park, probably the last big crowd we're going to have for a long time. The first big crowd they've had for 2 years. Sounded like a bit of a party atmosphere down there, maybe a bit too much of a party atmosphere. I think, people were using it as the last night out that they had. And then they get this, Castres are a difficult team to play against, but, Munster are better than Castres, especially that Castres team that were sent over. And they're box kicking, they're slowing things down. I know they scored a try that wasn't given that maybe would have broken the game wide open at the point of the game that it is. And you can look at all these individual moments, but ultimately it was a fairly turgid performance. It was a very dour approach to the game. And to be honest, it reflected all of the concerns and frustrations that a lot of us have had with Munster during the Van Graan era. Even the Razzie era, like Razzie had that unbelievable run, but once they came up against Saracens, that kind of South African way came up short because they don't have the tight five to deliver the win against the biggest teams. And the biggest indictment of Munster really is that they were offering Van Graan 2 more years on the basis of what they'd seen before, that they were happy with what they'd seen, especially with Larkham leaving. And then it's the slap in the face of the fact that he accepted the 2-year deal and then walked out to go to the bottom team in the Premiership, which is another day's work. But I don't think I think that it was time for a change of direction at Munster anyway. And this could have ended up, Van Graan goes off happy to Bath to build another project, decent man, very popular with the players, has done a solid job.
Yeah.
But I think to energize this Munster fan base, which is so big and is such a club with such not untapped potential, but untapped for a while, the potential is there, and an incredible array of really good young players. The time is now there for someone to come in and really energize that. And by playing a bit more of what we see from Connacht, I know we hold this up as the comparison all the time. I'd love to see Andy Friend get his hands on that team and see what he could do with the resources that he has. I mean, that's not going to happen in between the two provinces as it stands. But someone of that spirit, of that, attacking intent, which we thought we probably were going to get from Larkham. They need a better identity, they need a better coaching structure, but also they need a better way of playing the game, because there's such, as I say, potential in that club. And I think it's ready to be unleashed with the right, under the right kind of pair of hands.
Clock coming against us. A few things to mention. Obviously, there is action on the 26th, Ulster against Connacht. I'm sure Ulster looking to avenge that defeat at the Aviva Stadium, which really bothered Dan McFarlane, people will remember. And then, of course, Munster-Leinster is off. Leinster have closed down their training base at UCD in a bid, I suppose, to act as some kind of circuit breaker and get on top of this outbreak, which, Omicron being so transmissible, is working its way through the squad at a very alarming rate. So there's no Munster-Leinster game. Declan Kinney has been mentioned they are certainly asked about his interest potentially in Munster job. Is this just, he was asked about it and he straight batted it, so therefore the rumours are flying, or are there more concrete rumours behind the question?
It was on the front page of the rugby paper in England on Sunday, and there definitely seems to be something to it. And he's an obvious candidate to come in as a director of rugby. He's just done 3 or 4 years in England. He is a Munster great. He's the last man to lead them to the promised land. It may be a long time ago, but you wonder why. He had a nice job in UCC. He was the head of sport at UCC. He pretty much left rugby, and he was enticed back to this job at London Irish. He still has a home in Cork. Munster is he built the modern Munster identity. I think it's a really logical place to go for them as a DOR. Not as he's not Joe Schmidt. He's not a tracksuit coach who's going to come up with that game plan that I'm talking about. But he is the guy who is used to dealing with agents, doing the recruitment, hiring and firing coaches, all of that side of things. And London Irish are bringing through very good young players and are playing a very nice brand of rugby, and they're steadily, season on season, improving. Munster's a different job, but he knows that job very well. Certainly the phone call, I think, had to be made, particularly if O'Gara and O'Connell and all those people are saying no. And you bring him in and you're a DOR, and then he builds the coaching ticket beneath him, and he gets a bit of outside expertise, a bit of local expertise, melds it all together and sets that climate for Munster to succeed. It makes an awful lot of sense to me. Like people like Declan Kidney in New Zealand, they don't just jettison them once they're finished. They keep them on board in different roles. Look at Joe Schmidt coming in as a selector, whereas Eddie O'Sullivan and Declan Kidney were basically forgotten men once they left the Irish system. So
yeah, there's nowhere to go after the Irish
I think.
job. Yeah. Before you go then, we've about 2-3 minutes here, kind of tops, unfortunately. The clock got away from us. But very significant news. So Kevin Potts will take over as the CEO of the IRFU from January. Kevin Potts has been at the IRFU since 2005. He's been the chief operating officer for the last 7 years. And before that, he was in IFSC and chartered accountant by trade. So, and played some rugby as well, Ireland at schools and A-level and St. Mary's College. So Kevin Potts in as CEO of the IRFU, taking over from Philip Brown. 2 things. One, keep the show on the road with the pandemic, be top of his list. And then very close to top of his list, if not top, the dispute with 62 signatories on a letter. The IRFU have softened in their stance over the last week. So since we last spoke, certainly the 2 reviews are going to be made public, which is not insignificant.
Absolutely not. No, I would imagine Kevin Potts had some role in trying to soften that stance because he knew he was coming in. They scout. They had that whole thing about the world search, and they ended up with the guy in the office next to Philip Brown. But I think it makes sense at the stage of the pandemic that we're at and the different challenges that you've already outlined. They definitely, they softened their stance by Friday, and really, why couldn't they have done that in the first place, or at least had a more conciliatory approach on the Monday? Then we had the meeting between the players and Jack Chambers, the minister, and Minister Catherine Martin on Monday. The players seemed very encouraged. I believe that the ministers were very well briefed going into the meeting, which is encouraging, that they were aware of the situation on top of the whole thing. But really, I think the big, most important moment was that Dáil committee with Jack Chambers last week, where TDs, not Jack Chambers himself, but TDs started floating the idea that the tap could be turned off and that funding could be withheld from the IRFU until they sorted this out. They got 18 million from the government on the same day that the women released their letter. I'm not sure. I think the timing was pretty pointed. I think that the women knew that money was coming. And if that tap was turned off, I think the difference between on the balance sheet last year was that they would have lost 46 million, I think, had it not been for the CBC and government money during the last year of the pandemic. Instead, they lost 10 million. So that was a big chunk of change, and the government are a significant stakeholder in the IRFU's ability to manage their way through COVID. And I think that is the carrot that will bring them to the table. And I think Kevin Potts can put him, it's going to take an awful lot of detailed, boring, hard work to fix the problems in women's rugby in Ireland. But if he can get to the table and listen to the women who are there and build women's rugby into something strong, while also keeping the show on the road on the other side, which is no easy feat either. He's coming in at a very difficult time. I think that will be a significant achievement for him in the first couple of years. And he does know the game. He played for Leinster, Captain Mary's, he knows, more than Philip Brown would have been. He probably has the rugby knowledge to stand up to David Nucifora a little bit more as well, knows the game as well. So it's an interesting appointment. The big black mark on his CV was the World Cup bid. He led the World Cup bid, and that obviously fell flat, but it wasn't black enough to kind of keep him off the agenda for this. So big job, interesting times for him ahead. And with the 5,000 cap coming up right up to the day before, or a couple of days before the Six Nations, I think that's going to be the biggest worry on his mind at this stage, because if Six Nations is behind closed doors or with 5,000 in the stadium, that's big problem for the IRFU.
Let's not go there right now. Enjoy the Christmas. Rory O'Connor of the Irish Independent, do enjoy the Christmas. Thanks so much.
You too, and all the listeners.
Cheers. Rory O'Connor there of the Irish Independent. Just to let you know, by the way, half-time in the Carabao Cup, Liverpool with Caoimhín Kelleher in goal are 3-1 down to Leicester City, a Jamie Vardy hat-trick. Elsewhere, Spurs 2-1 up against West Ham, and Brentford and Chelsea 0-0.
Wednesday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us. Everyone in.
News Talk already gives you your daily fix of news and entertainment.
But wouldn't you like a little bit more? More?
News Talk Extra is everything you might have missed.
Plus, expert tips, podcasts and competitions.
All straight to your inbox.
Subscribe now at newstalk.com/extra.
That feeling is back. Live horse racing has returned to Leopardstown, which means you can be trackside again, enjoying the kind of crack that only a day at the races can bring. And of course, the thrill of the final